Uncle Robert, nobody else in the world can take the helm in an important department in the government for 50 years in a row, and meanwhile occupy another important position in another government except you. Your achievements are unprecedented and unexampled ever afterwards.
When I was young, I thought many things in the world are inseparable from each other, such as men and women, plains, mountains and rivers, sea and ships, matters and reason, me and Ayo, Britain and China, Robert Hart and the maritime customs of China.
In eastern China in 1860, the Taiping Army began taking over parts of Zhejiang province. The rebellious Taiping Heavenly Kingdom was expanding its boundaries. Hangzhou and Ningbo were occupied, and Shanghai faced imminent attack. In Beijing, it was decided to create a naval force comprised of warships bought in Britain. But the purchase needed a reliable middleman. The man who would handle this task was recommended by a fellow countryman named Horatio Nelson Lay, Inspector General of Chinese Maritime Customs Service. The Imperial Qing Court approved, and Lay was given overall responsibility for the purchase. Lay quickly placed the order. His next move was an audacious one. Without authorization, Lay hired British naval officer Shepherd Osborn and recruited more than 600 officers and men in England for the vessels. The new Chinese fleet would be firmly controlled by Lay. High-ranking Chinese officials such as Zhang Guofan and Li Hongjian and others strongly opposed his actions. In fury, the Qing government dismissed Lay, but the middleman who had been involved in the incident was appointed to replace him as Inspector General of the Chinese Maritime Customs Service. This mysterious middleman was Robert Hart. Both Lay and Hart had come to China to seek their fortunes. However, unlike Lay, Hart had other personal ambitions. Hart came from an ordinary family in Northern Ireland, but believed he had a glorious family background. As a child, he was told stories of an ancestor that followed William III to fight in Ireland. His bravery ultimately resulted in knighthood and a generous reward. Unfortunately, the generations of his family that followed squandered this wealth through extravagant living. Hart had developed a strong interest in his family history. He firmly believed in the stories of his ancestors' valor. This prompted him to study and work hard to promote his own career. He was determined to regain a noble title to restore the family glory. While studying for a master's degree in Belfast at Queen's University in 1854, Hart learned the Foreign and Commonwealth Office would recruit students from his university for the British consulate in China. With £50 from his father, Hart joined the other 35 students on a ship bound for China. Hart knew nothing of China. He was aware that Britain defeated China in a war, and he was now going there to serve the interests of his country. The task would require his knowledge, wisdom, patience, and insight. He also hoped it would achieve his long-cherished wish of family restoration. The British consulate in Ningbo was his destination. In the First Opium War in 1842, China was forced to sign several treaties, including the Treaty of Nanking. Along China's long coastline, 5 treaty ports, Guangzhou, Fuzhou, Xiamen, Ningbo, and Shanghai, would open to several major European countries. They would be allowed to have diplomats and European settlers living in these ports and implement tariffs.
长期以来呢，英国跟中国跟清政府的这个贸易，都是存在一种逆差的现象。它进来的东西在中国市场上并不很需要，但它要从中国运出去的，这个茶叶啊、陶瓷啊。等等啊，就很大量，所以这样的一进一出呢，这个是逆差的现象。他要解决这个问题，英国是个从商的国家，他这个政府呢非常重视商人的利益，所以要从政府的层面来解决这个问题。
在这些地方呢，这个外国呢就建立了一系列的这个领事馆。这个领事馆呢，其实就深入到中国的各个方面，各个地方，不像这个公使馆，它是在首都在北京。领事馆呢，它深入到中国的内地沿海和内地它就可以了解当地的这个情况。所以领事馆的一个很重要的一个任务呢，就是收集这个地区的它的这个中国的这个国情民情各方面的这个资料，来为这些他们的这个国家来制定这个对华政策来服务。
Beginning in the 1850s, the Taiping Rebellion grew and controlled a large portion of the country. The Qing dynasty faced a grave threat. Hart reached the relatively peaceful city of Ningbo via Hong Kong and Shanghai.
搜不远千里而来，亦将有以利五国乎？中就是中间的意思吗？中国就是中央之国？
中庸即为适合，也可以解释为完美，不偏不倚，中庸之和。所谓不卑不亢，就是一种中庸之道。
Hart began studying Chinese at the British consulate in Ningbo as an assistant interpreter in 1854, 12 years after the First Opium War. China was rich, but somewhat baffling to foreigners. To Hart, there was a strange language, unusual clothes, and new customs to learn. He knew it was important to learn Chinese and become familiar with the way people did things. Important if he wanted some room to maneuver. Hart's thoughts were dominated by the need to restore his family's glory. While others were wining and dining, he was hitting the books. The Chinese-English dictionary compiled by missionary Robert Morrison was his main resource. and his teaching materials were the Analects of Confucius and Mencius. Hart would recite lines in the morning or in the evening in the woods near the consulate. He hired an old Chinese teacher. Meanwhile, he carefully observed the habits and lifestyle of people in Ningbo. Unlike many foreigners who were often disdainful of the Chinese, Hart regarded this kind of behavior as a very bad example of Western civilization. He worried the Chinese would view foreigners as gangsters and looters. The influx of foreigners into Ningbo created conflicts and ultimately touched off a riot that caused deaths among the Portuguese in the city. There were rumors that all foreigners would be killed. Having experienced the riot, Hart became more prudent in word and deed. As he studied Chinese history, Hart found an Italian named Matteo Ricci had lived in China and had been in charge of calendar calculations. He discovered there were foreigners who gained rank in China. But misunderstandings and restrictions forced them to leave on bad terms. The clash of cultures came at a high cost, but also yielded valuable lessons. All of the stories were shrouded in gloom and featured confusion, friction, contradictions, and suffering. Each of these factors aggravated relationships and had tragic results. Hart didn't want to repeat these errors. He wanted to stay and prosper in China. So he behaved prudently and sought to do things in a rational way. As well as learning Chinese, he also began learning about Chinese civilization from reading about culture and philosophy. After reading many Chinese classic works of literature, Hart felt different about China from many other foreigners. However, restoring his family's glory remained his chief priority. Hart studied Chinese and during his spare time translated verses for the Ningbo version of Auld Lang Syne by Robert Burns. He often accompanied himself on the violin while singing. Britain manages the maritime customs service of China's Qing dynasty for half a century and becomes an eyewitness to a clash of cultures and foreign intervention in China. His name was Robert Hart, an unofficial minister of China. please stay with us for more of Robert Hart, a rover in China.
And then a woman kept you in China forever, right? Is that true? They say you abandoned yourself to an inglorious relationship.
Yao. This was not a relationship with a woman, but a love of China.
Hart was in the prime of life while working at the British consulate in Ningbo, but felt some loneliness as there were only about a dozen foreign families. He eventually became homesick and thought of returning to Belfast. This loneliness lasted until a girl named Yao came into his life. She was the daughter of a boatman, but was so graceful and gentle that Hart almost fell in love with her at first sight. They were deeply attached to each other for a long time.
But what has kept me in China forever is just my relationship with Yao. From that time, I have never dreamed about going back to Belfast. My love life always centers on China. Thanks to my romantic relationship with Yao, I live in China, but do not feel like an alien. Although being a foreigner, I have become much more attracted toward China.
Their love was full of exotic flavor, and with her help he greatly improved his Chinese. This also brought him much closer to China. Yao was not educated, but she was very clever and dexterous. Their close relationship made him determined to stay in China. Hart was ambitious, but lacked confidence in his future. After 5 years, he was transferred to the British consulate in Guangzhou to work as an interpreter. This posting was far from his expectation, but he worked hard for a further promotion. Ningbo was a small port, but it had adequate business and diplomatic work for him to perform. He became familiar with official etiquette and practices, as well as the character traits of senior officials of the Chinese and British governments. His careful and friendly personality, combined with a courteous approach, resulted in good private relations with Chinese officials. This allowed Hart to gather needed information of China. At the end of the 1850s, British and French forces occupied Guangzhou during the Second Opium War. There were not many foreigners who knew China well, and fewer who were proficient in Chinese. Hart became an important middleman. He had a humble position, but played a key role in Guangzhou. The mid-1850s saw the British and French capture Dagu Fort at the northerly port of Tianjin. This put them within easy reach of the capital, Beijing, forcing the Qing government to sign the Treaty of Tianjin. Even before the exchange of implementing documents, the emperor regretted having approved foreign legations in Beijing. He intended to revise provisions at the expense of the exemption of all customs duties. Hart learned of the emperor's plan from Chinese officials in Guangzhou and submitted the confidential information to the British.
1859年的时候，英国的公使布鲁斯呢曾经到广州来了解情况那么当时这个赫德是在广州领事馆，他就向这个英国公使呢提供了不少这个他收集到的一些情报关于这个中国的这个军队的布置大沽口的这个海防还有甚至调动这个整个临近的这个蒙古马队的这种军事情报所以他这些情报呢，对这个当时英国政府在这个第二次鸦片战争最后这个攻打北京都是有一定的帮助。
Using Hart's information, the British adjusted the deployment of military forces. A fleet was dispatched northward. War broke out again, forcing China to sign the Treaty of Tianjin.
I think Britain did not aim to invade or attack China, but to exert pressure on and force the Qing government to open up ports and engage in international trade. It is totally unreasonable that they stand still and refuse to make progress. Every country around the world supplies each other's needs, but how can a country of over 300 million people like China refuse to have trade relations with others? The Qing government even does not know about the international law. The national feelings of the Chinese people determine what they take pride in China's own system and despise everything alien.
Opportunity favors those who study the situation carefully. In 1859, Englishman Horatio Nelson Leigh became Hart's benefactor. Due to years of wars and tariff evasion by foreign businessmen, the annual revenue Guangdong Customs was able to send the Qing court was reduced by nearly half over a 5-year period. The governor of Guangdong and Guangxi grew anxious about the situation. To turn the tide, he decided to hire foreigners to manage Guangdong Customs using foreign practices. The courteous and competent young interpreter from Britain named Hart was their primary choice. To Hart, this is a rare opportunity to display his talents. Compared to his position at the consulate, Customs offered much more room for Hart to maneuver. During the Opium War, Hart won favor with British officialdom. On the recommendation of the British envoy in Beijing, Hart was appointed Deputy Inspector General of the Guangdong Customs Service. He had been looking for such a chance for years to enter Chinese government service. Horatio Nelson Leigh was the newly appointed Inspector General. A member of a British diplomat's family, he was brought up in China. However, he looked down on China and the Chinese. He even referred to the Chinese emperor as an Asian barbarian. His overbearing personality made him the nemesis of the Qing officialdom. In March 1861, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs invited Leigh to Beijing, but the latter thought it a waste of time to meet corrupt Chinese officials. He preferred to return to Britain for rest and recuperation. Before departure, he appointed Hart to go to Beijing to report to Prince Gong, a senior member of the royal family, on his behalf. Lei was an obstinate and unruly man. He behaved so aggressively that the Chinese, and even his foreign colleagues, hated to have any contact with him. Hart saw this as a good opportunity. The 15th of June in 1861 was a day of significance for Hart. It was very hot that day. Early in the morning, he dressed up to go and meet Prince Gong. He had prepared a great deal of statistical information about the Guangdong Customs Service. Hart was well prepared to take advantage of this golden opportunity. Beijing had been the capital of 3 feudal dynasties covering more than 700 years. There were groups of foreigners living legally in the area close to the Forbidden City. They were foreign ministers permitted to be stationed in Beijing after the Second Opium War. Emperor Shanfang worried about the presence of foreigners in Beijing. The Qing court set up the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, led by Prince Gong. Prince Gong was keen on Western affairs, and some people called him a foreign devil. After the Second Opium War, he quickly separated himself from stodgy and conservative bureaucrats to get to know foreigners. Hart was aware that to be successful in China, he must get to know Prince Gong. When they met at the prince's mansion, Hart found him to be educated, elegant, prudent, and modest. He had just taken over the new ministry, but showed no air of importance over the new job. Instead, he was graceful and dignified. The Qing government was feeling a financial pinch at home, especially as it was caught up in trying to put down the Taiping Rebellion. Hart presented his plan to increase financial revenue.
当时的清朝政府呢，一个是如何尽快的镇压太平天国，这是他的心头之患，啊。那么怎么样来镇压呢？赫德出了主意，一个是要钱啊，要弄钱，对吧？一个是要这个怎么样购买武器，强壮这个清军的力量。那么钱从哪来？这个海关是一个税收啊，是一个很重要的方面。这个赫德在进京之前做了很好的准备，他写了7个条存吧。这个就是说，这个怎么样整理海关啊，整理一下这个，然后呢就可以有增加多少税收啊，这个税收呢就可以来提供给清政府。
赫德呢，他成长在他英国的资本主义上升时期，而到中国呢，其实中国是中国的封建社会的没落时期，反差这么大。说它带来的一种先进的理念、思想和世界观过来，在这样的一个环境底下，刚好中国又要接受西方、学习西方、接触西方，在这么一个这个跟 东西方都在结印的这个情况下，他来到中国。
Unlike Lei, Hart didn't see the Qing emperor and ministers as Asian barbarians. Instead, he found they were cultured and had their own courage and wisdom. Hart did not see them as inferior to Europeans. Instead, he saw them as restricted by their system and situation.
I was deeply impressed by Prince Gong's devotion to understanding customs transactions. Strange to say, Prince Gong noticed how low taxes may bring benefits to trade. But those experienced and shrewd ministers from Zhongli Yamen did not see this and stubbornly insisted on high taxes. This price was not very smart or well versed in foreign politics or political economics, but his intention was good. As long as he knows what is right and is allowed to do accordingly, he is eager to do the right thing.
The Ministry of Foreign Affairs was ignorant of customs operations, so Hart explained his suggestions and received Prince Gong's approval. The meeting became relaxed and friendly. The prince was impressed by Hart's view on trade tax and China's internal and external affairs. He also liked Hart's manner. A barrier was removed. Intense hostility between the two sides, caused by war and treaties, disappeared. Prince Gong showed trust in a foreigner for the first time and called him Our Hart. With the approval of Prince Gong, his political fate in China underwent unprecedented change. Of Britain manages the maritime customs service of China's Qing dynasty for half a century and becomes an eyewitness to a clash of cultures and foreign intervention in China. His name was Robert Hart, an unofficial minister of China. Please stay with us for more of Robert Hart, a rover in China. Lei returned to Britain with honors and was made a Duke of the Third Rank by Queen Victoria. Hart was formally appointed Acting Inspector General of the Customs Service. From that day on, the Qing government would double his monthly salary. Hart was convinced that a thorough understanding of Chinese culture was essential for him to deal with people. He understood the philosophy of achieving harmony through moderation, and he benefited by pursuing it. A month later, Hart left Beijing on a business trip to several trading ports. He reorganized customs in these ports along the lines of the Guangzhou and Shanghai customs operations. He was only the acting inspector general, but he pushed himself to be as thorough as possible. The Shanghai Customs was the first in China to hire a foreign inspector general. In 1859, Horatio Nelson Lei had set up the Guangzhou and Shantou customs with foreigners serving in the top posts. By the end of 1861, this applied to the customs operations in Tianjin, Yantai, Zhenjiang, Ningbo, Hangzhou, and Fuzhou. Others followed in Xiamen and Tamsiu and Dagou in Taiwan. Just when things were going smoothly, the wildly ambitious Lei engineered the Osborn Flotilla incident. Hart was the middleman for the Qing government to purchase warships from Britain, and the abrupt changes instigated by Lei landed him in quagmire.
但当时呢，这个李泰国呢，他就擅自的和这个阿斯本呢签订了一个协议或者说合同啊，在这个上呢，就说阿斯本这个舰队呢，只能服从中国皇帝的这个命令，不服从其他人的啊。另外一个呢，中国皇帝的命令呢，要由李泰国来传达啊。那么李泰国如果认为这个命令不合适的话，他也可以改变。也就是说，阿斯本他可以不受中国政府的控制啊，不接受中国政府的这个命令啊，完全是一个这个凌驾在中国之上。
The ships the Qing court had purchased for a considerable amount of silver would become Lei's private fleet. The Qing court was shocked, and Hart was caught in the middle of the scandal. Lei asked Jiangsu Governor Li Hongzhang for the money that was still owed for the purchase of the British ships. But Li refused. He stated there was no money, and even if they had it, they would not give it to him. Lei was sharply rebuffed by the Jiangsu government. Li Hongzhang's anger reflected that of the Qing government. Although the war-torn country had lost part of its sovereignty, it still had independent government and military systems. Even as the government was working to wipe out the Taiping Rebellion and other insurrections, none developed into warlords. Military power was the most sensitive topic for the Qing.
当时的清政府，特别像曾国藩、李鸿章这些人，他们对洋人一方面要借助、要依靠，但是另一方面，他们也有之间有一定的矛盾，有一定的抵制啊。像曾国藩就曾经说过，这洋人如果是对他们国家有利，对中国也有利啊，这样的事情我们是一定支持的啊。如果对他们国家有利，对中国不利啊，这样的事情我就不能接受啊，就不能要抵制。
这个时候的中国的形势呢，太平天国已经到了后期了。太平天国是1864年就最后8月份最后那个失败了嘛。那么呢，到了这1863年的时候，太平天国也已经不行了啊。所以这支舰队来了以后，这个地方上是不接受的，曾国藩、李鸿章是坚决不接受的，就认为他们完全可以依靠自己的力量来镇压太平天国了，没有必要让一支洋人的这样一支舰队来参与啊。那么清政府当局呢，当然你这个离岸合同不撤销的话，也不能够接受这样一支舰队啊。而且连美国公司当时也多，就其他外国觉得也不得了啊，这个英国人马上要控制这样一支舰队了，他们也都群起反对。
Supported by the British government, Lei failed to realize his move was absurd and overbearing. Instead, he threatened to sell the fleet to the Taiping army. If the deadlock continued, the situation would risk the very existence of a customs system that was still in its initial construction. Hart, who first suggested the purchase of the fleet, would end up in an embarrassing and even dangerous situation. It involved the very sensitive issue of military leadership. So an enraged Qing court might dismiss Hart, and his decade-long effort to achieve success in China would be in vain. Offending the Chinese government would leave Hart with no future in China. But Lei was his direct superior, meaning Hart ultimately worked for Britain. He realized that only calm analysis and rational decisions could help him escape. Hart needed to find a compromise to minimize the losses suffered by both sides and extricate himself from the predicament.
So Prince Gong and I drew up a trade-off plan. A Chinese official is appointed as naval commander and Osborn as deputy commander. The Foreign Office present the certificate of appointment to Osborn, who would discipline his subordinates. The Chinese Navy could go on board to learn. The Foreign Office would pay a certain taels of silver per month for the maintenance of the fleet. The Foreign Office thought my suggestions were reasonable.
The Qing government adopted Hart's proposal. In this way, he became a mediator for China in resolving the dispute.
I never thought that in the latter half of my life I began wandering between two different worlds as an intermediary. On the one side is China, and the other is Britain.
Have you ever felt being split up and painful living in between?
In fact, I have deeply felt the agony of being split up, but also tasted the fruit of mediating between two worlds.
While making suggestions to the Qing government, Hart also tried hard to reduce the inevitable loss of face for Lei, who found himself in a blind alley. Lei was dismissed. In dismay, he left China months later. Back in England, he tried investing in business, but failed. Without any income, he lived by borrowing money and became a lonely, isolated alcoholic. The Lei incident was a lesson for Hart. He knew that if he lost the Chinese government's trust and failed to make a difference in the performance of Chinese customs, he might end up like Lei. It would end his dream of rejuvenating his family fortune. Hart was anxious and fearful about his future. However, he was to be appointed Inspector General of the Chinese Maritime Customs Service. His skills in mediation and rational way of doing things, a sharp contrast with that of Lei, had paid off. The Qing government gave him Lei's old job. Hart was now a major figure in China. He was 28 that year and had worked in Chinese customs for 5 years. He was deeply grateful and determined to go all out to serve the country. While many foreigners were dismissive and arrogant toward the Chinese, Hart chose to be modest. When most foreigners sought to serve their own interests or countries, Hart worked to provide service to his employer, the Qing government.
First and foremost, I must always bear in mind that China's Imperial Maritime Customs Service is an organ serving China rather than foreign countries. I received official salaries and should be a servant to the Chinese government. I stand by the Chinese people's side and will try my best to help them.
赫德呢，他到中国来以后，他学习了不少中国的这个文化，特别儒家思想的一些东西啊。那么他虽然也是一个英国人啊，也得到了英国政府的支持，但他同时呢，他觉得他是清政府的雇员啊，因为是清政府任命他为这个总税务司啊，所以他也作为这个身份，他应该对清政府也要忠诚啊。所以他的工作，他认为呢，他既要为这个清政府要谋利益，但同时呢，也有利于大英帝国。
我不认为是忠诚啊，我想在这个赫德比较识时务，一个是他作为一个外交人员，他为什么辞去了这个外交职务，而愿意到海关？这个他看到了，这个控制中国海关的话，对于这个中英这个贸易啊，维护英国这块利益可能发挥更大的作用，啊，这是一个方面。另外呢，就是说，他在这个过程当中，如何站稳自己的脚跟，一个是一定要维护清政府的利益，你不维护他的利益，你怎么可以站稳脚跟呢？
Hart's position of responsibility and authority in China meant he had restored his family glory in less than 10 years. Chinese customs was a hotbed of corruption. About half of the tariffs collected ended up in the pockets of officials. To operate, business people had to offer bribes. While officials in the customs service became wealthy, China's national treasury was running short of money. The ship Hart was about to set sail on was leaking. What would Hart have to do to plug the holes and keep the ship afloat? The Chinese Maritime Customs Service Hart controlled was notorious for dirty deals. Hart would have to press ahead with creating a modern management system while serving as a mediator in diplomatic affairs. An anti-foreigner movement gained momentum and Hart faced danger. Please join us again for the second part of Robert Hart, a rover in China.